This is Uptown Voices, the podcast that represents the people of Inwood, Washington Heights, Harlem, and the South Bronx. We celebrate our neighbors, hold leaders accountable, and seek community-centric solutions to the issues we're all confronting. Spread love. It's the Uptown way.
What up, everyone? It's Black and my brother Octavio Blanco with another episode of Uptown Voices. Before I go any further, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, the Uptown Collective channel. Spread that love, show us that love. And today is a very special episode. When Octavio and I were talking about Uptown Voices, one of the first people that I wanted to talk to was my next guest. She is, I think, probably one of the most prolific artists uptown. You know, when something's happening in the world, our next guest is going to come with an image that perfectly encapsulates it. She's an art powerhouse, my friend, again, an uptown art luminary, Andrea Arroyo. Andrea, how you doing, sister? How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
And I know you've been traveling around the world, so I'm glad we got you. You know, we have we're gonna get right into it because we have a big opening, the 17th annual Woman in the Heights Shade is coming up. I think the opening is February 25th, right? So tell us what we can expect. Tell us about Women in the Heights and, you know, where it where it's now.
So, yeah, Women in the Heights. I love it. I moved to the Heights around 17 years ago. So when I moved, I immediately contacted NOMAA and I brought this idea because I knew Uptown had a lot of talented artists. I just knew, you know, a lot of women artists and a lot of talent. So I brought the project to NOMAA and they immediately embraced it. So it's been 17 years. So it's unbelievable. Every year we have a different subject, a different theme, and the show has been growing just beautifully. It started with maybe 20 artists and maybe 40 applications, and it's been growing not only in quantity but in quality of submissions and also in the reach. I mean, we have a diverse group of artists. Every year is different. We have a multi-generational, multi-racial, multi-everything show. And it's wonderful to see so many beautiful women creating beautiful art and sharing it with the Uptown community and the community at large. So yay for women artists.
And the topic shade, right? That could mean so much. What are the because I think colorism, I think shade, like throwing shade on someone. Like what is shade about?
So exactly. So there are so many layers of the theme. So, you know, I thought immediately about throwing shade, but also sheltering in shade, right? Sheltering in shade, hiding in shade. So it is refuge, it is concealment, it is protection, it's defiance. So it sometimes hides, sometimes reveals. And I think it's just perfect for these days, these times that we're living in right now. There are so many layers. And we have over 40 artists tackling the theme shade in very different ways, different approaches, different languages, different voices. Some of them are literal, people doing photographs about and, you know, are surrounding shade, but also more nuanced, you know, images and ideas, throwing shade, colorism, and also just literal shade of color, just color range in art. So I think it's going to be very exciting. It's going to be very exciting. And as usual, you know, the show is, you know, a landmark for NOMAA. The openings are usually fantastic. Everybody's just, you know, happy to be there and celebrating women's talent. So yeah, looking forward to it.
And you know, one of the things and I'm sorry, Octavio, I'm just like such a fan of Andrew that I'm taking this over. But you know, one thing I love about NOMAA in general, but Women in the Heights particularly, is that you have this beautiful cross section of artists such as yourself or Rose Deller that are like experienced veteran artists, and you have the younger folks that are coming along, and it's like this kind of relationship where they get to see, you know, from what an working artist looks like, and I think that's a beautiful thing of that. Do you actively cultivate that?
Absolutely. I think it's super important for artists of all ages to build that community, to feed off each other. I mean, I learn more from my artists than they learn from me. So I think that's beautiful. And this year we have someone who's in her teens and someone who's in her 80s. And we have a range of artists. They're coming from all over Uptown, Harlem, West Harlem, East Harlem, Uptown, Inwood, Washington Heights. So it's a beautiful group. And it's also, this time we have, I think, around 40% of artists who are new to NOMAA. So that's even more beautiful because the community keeps growing. So I always say, once a women in the heart heights artist, you'll always be, part of that community. So it's beautiful.
I love that. Love that. One last question: Have you begun mounting it yet, or not yet?
I'm excited. It's going to start next week, so I'm super excited. And
Do you know
it's
what you're
always a
doing?
surprise.
Do you know what you're doing, or are you gonna know when you get there?
I have a vision, but always, the work. I mean, I have my vision of the design, but once you're there, the artwork actually speaks to you, and it kind of tells you where it wants to go. So, yeah, it's
That's
always very
amazing.
exciting. It's a lot of work. It's an amazing team effort with NOMAA and the whole NOMAA team. Everybody participates. So it's labor intense and a labor of love as well. So super excited.
Yeah, hi Andrea. The question that I have is on the a little bit on the economics of it all, I guess, in a way, because I think that I personally am so proud of you for 17 years of setting this up, of making sure that women artists in the Heights are getting, the views of their artwork that they deserve. And my question though is also, does this event, because you yourself have such a huge network of people that you work with, you work with magazines, you work with galleries, you work with museums both in the United States and internationally, you have this really a global network of people. Do you find that by doing this that it attracts not just people like myself and Led, who are huge supporters of Uptown Arts and other neighbors, but does it also attract people from outside of the community to come and see what the pulse is on the streets of Washington Heights for the artists in Washington Heights? And does it give these artists the opportunity to be seen beyond our neighborhood, which in my view is enough to be seen in our neighborhood, but I feel like there's that added level of opportunity for somebody who's either just starting or somebody who hasn't gotten the exposure that they deserve to be seen by the quote unquote like art industry, galleries and museums and things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, the show is well known. We usually have a lot of media attention, so that helps. And also the artists themselves, they bring their communities, they bring their guests. And I have to tell you, it's not only about exposure, it's about creating this community that, we feed on each other. So we not only give opportunities, but we create opportunities. And I also think I can share with artists how to create their own opportunities, because sometimes there's this sense of, waiting for somebody to see us or, discover something. And, I hate that word discover. And I hate the word exposure, like in the terms of the art world, because, I always say, people die of exposure and literally they do. And
Right.
I think it's super important for people to feel empowered and to have that sense of agency to create their own opportunities and not wait. So when you have that mindset, it's just better. It's just your work is going to be more visible. You're going to be more confident, and it's just going to work better. Also, artists have the opportunity to sell their work in this exhibition, and we always have sales, so that helps them, also encourage them. It also cultivates a community of collectors, and they can be from uptown, they can be somebody who's never bought a work of art but came into the gallery and just fell in love with a piece, or it can be a professional collector who's has a huge collection, and that is an important collection. So I think it is a fantastic opportunity for everyone, and it's a fantastic opportunity for New York to see what Uptown has to offer. And I believe, I mean, I have not, I don't know how to work the numbers, but I do believe that Uptown has the highest per capita, artists in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah, it makes sense because it's one of the last, more or less affordable neighborhoods that is around. I think What you said was so important, though, that it's not about necessarily exposure because exposure has so many, it's a double-edged sword in so many ways. The fact that it's community building, the fact that it's something that Led and I discuss on this show all the time, the importance of community building. And I thank you for highlighting that, because I imagine, and I'm not an artist, but I do imagine that being an artist can be lonely sometimes. And it can be hard to break out of your studio and go out and meet other artists. So creating this opportunity has to be so empowering to other artists. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And one thing to mention is also that, within NOMAA, NOMAA has done such an incredible job in terms of cultivating this community, creating these safe spaces, and just having that embrace just creates this environment of safety and trust that is really not common. Is something very rare, especially in New York City, because there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of just life is tough for many artists, so it's hard to get in a room with 200 people or 40 artists and feel safe and feel trust and feel embraced. And that's what I love the most about NOMA. They have been doing that for many, many years, and it gets better and better. And I can also see it when I see the progression of an artist who started showing 17 years ago as an emerging artist, and then the progress that they made and how they grow as creatives, how they grow as professionals. So that's also really beautiful to see, and also really beautiful for the younger artists to witness.
Andrea, I have a question about like your output. Like, you're prolific in the sense that you're doing these shows, like Octavio said, you're global, you're actually traveling around the world. But whenever something, you get precise in the sense like something happens today, you're going to have an artwork about it, right? Like, I imagine, of course, that that's your way of dealing with it. But how do you do that and still keep your head above water and still manage to do all the things you do?
So I think for me, it creating art makes helps me process it. It's kind of my way of dealing with it, because sometimes, many times, especially these days, things are so horrible, so overwhelming, and you're already dealing with your own life, with your own stuff, and challenges and every day. But then something happens, something large happens, big, horrible. And sometimes it's so horrible, it can be paralyzing. So what I do is I fight really hard not to get into that space. For me, that fighting is creating art. So let's say today there was a mass shooting in Canada. So I'm already thinking of what I'm going to publish tomorrow, right? And it's a lot of work. I don't have to do it, right? In theory, I shouldn't have to do it. It shouldn't be my job. But it is part of how I deal with things, is part of how I think I can contribute something rather than just, getting paralyzed or complaining or just talking about it. I do believe that art can change the world. I just do. And I also believe that activism is healing. It's not, it's done as a service. And when you do something as a service, it heals you and it heals the other. So that's, the beautiful part of it. And I also think, sometimes when all of these horrible things happen, people tend to just, complain about it or just, blurt out things. And I always say, complaining is not activism, right? So there's something horrible happening. So my question every morning is, what am I going to do about it today?
Let me just follow up on that.
No, go for it. Yeah. Please.
What I find interesting is, right, because you're such an activist, because artist solidarity, which is one of the phrases you use often. I always thought that it would be you, not your husband, Fego, who be like, become like a something for the authorities, right? I was so blown away when I heard Fego's piece was taken down, in the Latino section of the Smithsonian. I always thought it was you. You know what I mean? I was like, it was going to be you. How did you feel when that happened? Like, what did that blindside you? What was the take on it?
Well, it was me first, actually.
Really?
Yeah. So in 2017, just the day after the election of Trump, the first term, I created a project titled Unnatural Election.
I remember
And
that. Yep,
I
I remember that.
invited over 400 artists from around the world to participate. So I organized an online exhibition and exhibitions in galleries and museums, and I had a ton of press, and it was really healing for a lot of the artists because they needed that space to express themselves. And yeah, I had quite a bit of backlash, including a formal statement from Trump's advisor on diversity
Wow.
saying that I was anti-democratic and anti-American, all of those things. It was scary at the time, but this time with Fego, it felt different. It felt much worse because in my case, I almost felt as if it was an opinion about me as an artist, as an individual. And that happens. And, it's pretty horrible, but who cares in a way? I already had the exhibition up. Freedom of expression is, part of, our rights in this country. So, but this time with Fego felt really, really different because it felt more of a strategy, of an institutional position, of a way of intimidating artists at large rather than just criticizing one particular artist, which was in my case. It really feels now that they're doing this as a strategy, as a way of silencing artists and activists. And it just feels, it is worse. It's just different, it's more institutional, and is widespread. And it also is now backed by a lot of the supporters of these policies and this backwards philosophy, really. So it was shocking, not quite surprising. It was shocking, but it also, it tells you about the power of art and how an image like Fego's image is a sweet image. There's so much beauty in it. It's
Yeah.
not a
It was very
confrontational image.
aspirational. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
It's beautiful, it's sweet, it's humorous, and that tells you these people do not understand the language of love. You know what I mean? It will be
Yeah.
because they don't censor a lot of images that are more cartoony and more confrontational. They kind of know how to deal with that. But when they see beauty, they freak out. And that, that tells us a lot.
That does. That really.
I have a question for you, Andrea, about your roots, your Mexican roots, and how they impacted your strident art. I guess there's like two schools of thought around art. One, I guess, and I'm simplifying this, so forgive me, but one school of art is just create art for the beauty, for creating art, and just do that. And then there's another school of art that is more strident and has a message that wants to impact society and make a social change. And I wonder, and I feel like that's part of what has sort of especially with Mexican modernism, I wonder if how your roots as a Mexican artist have impacted your viewpoint as an artist today.
Well, Mexico is in my DNA, right? So it really impacts every aspect of my life. I grew up in Mexico City. I'm come from a very working class background, but I was exposed to art in public spaces all the time, right? Because Mexico has this tradition of public art, murals, and just in general, it's a country and a culture that perceives and absorbs and exudes beauty, everything. It's just like, a flower pot is not a flower pot. It has, a beautiful painting of, something. And, a fork is not a fork, but it has, a little flower at the end. And like everything has this layer of, aesthetic, um, this charged with this aesthetic influence and history. So, it definitely influenced me. Now, I also am very passionate about public art. And I know for a fact that public art changes lives because it changed mine. So you're a kid, you're 4 or 5 years old, and you go into this building, and it's a public building. Maybe your mom took you to get like a birth certificate or something, And then suddenly you're, facing these magnificent murals that, honor and celebrate Mexican culture, pre-Columbian, pre-Hispanic. And it's just, it made me feel and strive for a world that was bigger than mine. And that stays with me every time. So yeah, it is an influence. It also coming from Mexico, a place where I didn't feel as safe as I feel here, although these days I don't feel safe at all. But coming when I first arrived, it made me feel safe enough to speak about some things that I may not have done in Mexico at other times. So it's it's Mexicans. We're fierce, and we're also, it's such a beautiful culture, and everything is layered and layered. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. And it's interesting that you came here and it sort of gave you the feeling of safety so that you could express yourself in a way that maybe you wouldn't in Mexico. And it's interesting what you were saying about public art and murals, because at this time and right now, in our a lot of our public post offices, they're destroying the beautiful historic murals that are there that depict our past and our and it's this artwork is there to remind us not just of the great things but also of the painful things. And that's one thing that I know in Mexico, what's so impressive is that many of the government buildings, say what you will about the government, whether it's good or bad or corrupt or not corrupt, but the government buildings are they they value and they display artwork that doesn't always show Mexico in the best light. you know it shows the historical mistakes that may have been made, and I think that that's part of what shows what a society is, to show the mistakes that you've made and strive to make amends. And look at Mexico right now, it's got a woman president. It's an incredible change. And look where we are in the United States now. We have this horrible administration that's actively destroying historic artworks in public spaces, which is disgusting. So that's my rant.
Andrea, so why did you why you could have lived anywhere else? Why you chose Uptown? Why did you choose here and stay here?
Well, I wanted to be surrounded by artists as much as possible. I also wanted, just in practical terms, a large apartment with a lot of light where my husband and I could both have separate studios and a separate office and, just space. I wanted to have a pre-war apartment if possible and also access to nature. I was a runner at the time. I'm a walker now. and but access to the park and to the water was very important to me. So that helped. And just, when we were looking for a place, we were going around all over Manhattan. And I first was looking at Harlem, and I love Harlem, but Harlem didn't have as many large spaces as we wanted. And also at that time, it was a little bit of a food desert, which to me was very, very telling in terms of community. But, Washington Heights had everything. I remember we came for a tour of historical Washington Heights. And we went on this tour to Maurice Jomel, to Hispanic Society, to Intercession, to a lot of these institutions. And I figured, gosh, this place is filled with history, and at the same time is so contemporary, so vibrant, and so New York. In terms of diversity, we have friends who are from all over Latin America, and friends from Russia and Eastern Europe. It's just fantastic, and it's also very accessible. So
Right.
I knew that I needed to stay in Manhattan just because I needed I have studio visits and people who come see my work. I needed to be in Manhattan and have easy access. So, but we fell in love with it. Totally fell in love with it. Yeah.
Go ahead, Octavio. Go ahead, brother.
No, I know that you travel quite a bit, quite extensively, and that you were recently in France. And I wanted to hear a little bit about your trip to France and how you were received there, and what is the mood in France, both in terms of you as an American artist coming over to France, and also you as like a conduit to speak to the French about what's happening in this country and to hear what their reaction is to what's happening in this country. Because in France, also it has its own right wing and it has its own issues, which were on the rise, and I don't know where they are now. But I'm curious to hear about your visit to France. Why were you there? What sort of transpired while you were there? How did it go over there?
It went, I mean, for me particularly, it went great. It was a beautiful trip. But I do have to say, we've been traveling for 40 years all over the world. And really, it's shocking how the perception of the United States has changed, right? It used to be that you arrived anywhere in the world, Latin America, Thailand, Europe, anywhere, and you say, I'm from New York, and it was like, you're cool. Like immediately you're cool. And people have these aspirational ideas about what it is to, live in the United States of America, and this admiration, right? That has changed radically, right? So, and the French are very expressive about their opinions. And so it's changing, and it's tough because the French in general are just, very free to express whatever they want. And, that's a very good thing. They communicate their opinions. And that's got a free country, though. That's great. I think the perception is that not only we're going backwards, but there used to be that perception that the US was just not, in general, a very worldly place. It was isolated in terms of, their own perception of, what the world was. And it was this kind of, very focused on itself rather than on a global scale. And, it's understandable because it's a huge country. Europe is usually this, a bunch of different countries that kind of have to talk to each other all the time, and they have for forever. So the US is a little isolated in that sense. So that's understandable. But right now, with globalization the way it is, it is not an option to be thinking in those terms, isolationist. Now, I went to France for an exhibition. I was invited to have an exhibition at Saint Georges Le Martel, which is just outside Limoges. And I had a show of my project, Imaginations, Art as Solidarity. So they show around 80 of my works.
Wow.
And I gave different talks and lectures, and we had thousands of visitors, and it was a beautiful opportunity to engage with a different audience, especially with young people. They brought a lot of school groups, high school groups, and that was very, very interesting. I also had the honor of receiving 2 awards. One was the People's Choice Award for the exhibition. So that's the exhibition that people like the most, which is very, very sweet. And
Yeah.
the other was the award for freedom of expression. So, very important subject right now in France and in the US as well, and increasingly all over the world. So for me, it was a fantastic opportunity. I got a great experience. We have many friends there, and people are lovely. But I see the change of perception, about the United States of America, and it's sad, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, we definitely do. But it does feel like the mask has been taken off because, I think for a long time, the United States, was able to hide some of its uglier sides. And right now, the mask has totally been taken off, and all of our ugliness is exposed. But maybe that's a good thing. And in terms of art, they say that the difficult times is when the best art is created. And I see you responding with your art and your challenge to the regime with your art. You mentioned it a little bit, but I'd like to ask you if you could go a little bit, if I could ask you again, just how do you protect yourself, your and I don't mean physically protect yourself, I mean sort of like emotionally protect yourself when you're reacting to so much ugliness in the world. Does your creation of art, is that cathartic for you, or do you have to compartmentalize and then go cry in a closet, or like, how do you you maintain the beauty of your art as well? Because there is so much ugliness out there. So I find it must be challenging as an artist to still present the beautifully, which you are successful at.
So I think that's one of my, you know, one of my goals all the time when I do this and I do an artwork about something that is really awful is to present it in a way that brings beauty, right? For me, I don't cry in a closet. When I cry out in the open. I'm not ashamed, so it's fine. But I tend to, I cry for a little bit, but I tend to ask myself quite soon after, what am I going to do about it? Right. So, because that feels empowering and feels like, I have agency. For me, focus is very easy for me to focus on love and focus on tenderness. Right. So that's what I do. There are many artists who do more confrontational work that is needed, and we need to hear those voices. But for me, I focus as much as possible on tenderness. Even when I'm doing an image that is strong or sad to look at, it has to have tenderness, at least in the line, in the aesthetic, in the visual. The visual has to give you something, has to give you some kind of hope, some kind of something. So for me, I think it helps that my style is very fluid and very lyrical. I was trained as a dancer. So I think I bring that
Can see
background
that.
to all of my art. Like everything moves in curves and is very fluid. And even when I'm talking about something harsh and horrible, let's say something like gun violence, the lines that are curvy and beautiful give me the sense of movement. So that at the same time it gives me the sense of, this is not a static thing. It can change. It will change. So it flows, like everything flows, right? So that's what I do. I focus on love and I focus on tenderness and on service, basically. I make art to express myself, for sure. I like beauty. I think beauty is absolutely needed. It's a right, and beauty is revolutionary. Um, and it comes in many different forms.
I love that about you. And just talking to you helps me understand your work even more. And I've already been a fan of yours. And it's also, I understand, like, you don't shy away from things, right? You've already talked about Gaza, about Palestine, right? You have not shied away from the tough topic either. What makes you so fearless?
I have no choice. We have no choice. It's there's not an option. We have to fight for what's right. We have to face the challenges. It's survival. It's basically survival. And again, getting into that space of complaining or feeling victimized, even though we are all at some point victims, is not productive. And there is a way out. We have the power to change it. Maybe we're not going to change it tomorrow, but we can change it every day with little things, little gestures. That's why I always say focus on tenderness and love, because maybe we cannot change, the outcome of the election, but we can change the way we treat our fellow, I don't know, subway riders. We can change the way we look at a stranger, or we can change the way we approach something that we used to approach with harshness or ignore. And that changes the world, it ripples. So there have to be waves of love and tenderness. So I think that's my shelter.
Yeah, and I think sometimes love, tenderness, laughter, when we talk about Fego, like in his art, love, tenderness, laughter, those are ways that can kind of diffuse anger, hatred, and aggression to get actual communication to start happening. So, I get that. I see where you're coming from, and I applaud you for sticking to that because I think at the end of the day, despite our differences, we have to find a way to communicate with each other and get our ideas um, into into the into the minds of the people who may not completely agree with us. I mean, it's a challenge. Like, led me and you, we talk about like Latinos for Trump a lot and how frustrated we are by Latinos for Trump. I found myself this weekend, in fact, speaking to a Latino for Trump and getting so angry that I just had to like walk away from the conversation because I didn't feel that that we were getting anywhere because there was so much. I had so much anger, and he was sort of trolling me, looking for that anger. So I sometimes leave those situations and I feel disappointed in myself that I couldn't have a better conversation because I was feeling the heat, but I had to turn around before it got into actual like shouting or something like that. But the work that you do, I find that it is more, it's tender, like you say. It's got fluidity, and it presents something in a way that somebody will say, "Oh, that's really beautiful," and they may not even see the message until later on. They're like, "Now I understand," and I think that's powerful. That's power.
Yeah, that actually happens quite often where people, are attracted to an image and then they realize it has a different substance or content. And that helps a lot. And I always say, political discourse, and we have been talking about this so long and we haven't been able to fix it, right? So talking is not necessarily the answer sometimes, but art has this power of it hits your soul, right? If the art is good, it speaks to you, right? And it allows us to connect to our humanity. So it does change people's perception. And that's why I always say it changes the world, because even when you change one person, like the perception they have about, I don't know, Latinos or women or this or that, if you manage to change that or shift it, that is the start for a change. And that's very, very important. And the other part is that joy itself, I mean, our existence is resistance, right? Our visibility is resistance. Even if because sometimes I do paint just beautiful paintings. They don't necessarily show something politically out there, but everything is political, right?
Yeah.
So even when I paint, a work about flowers or mythology or women or the beauty of the female form, it is political. It's a political statement. And it's part of that idea of also joy as resistance and creating these spaces where we are seen in our full humanity and as, layered individuals and layered communities where, we are complex, as complex as anyone else.
Yeah, and can I just follow up just quickly? Just say, what because you inspired me to in what you were saying to me, as opposed to what I was engaging in over the weekend, which was a debate. It's not a debate. Art is sort of like a statement, and the person who's observing it can decide within themselves, right? Because nobody is telling them anything. You're just looking at something. It's a very personal thing. Your political opinion is a very personal thing. And when you're debating somebody with words, I feel like sometimes a lot of that debate is just saving face, right? Somebody is just trying to explain to you why they're feeling this way or why they choose this. But with art, what's so powerful about it is that that person is then having maybe a debate within themselves about why do I actually feel this way? And that artwork empowers them to say, to have that internal monologue that has nothing to do with anybody else, and to maybe come to the realization that they need to make amends, or that they need to respect women more, or that they need to conserve the environment, or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
I see art as an invitation, right? And people engage as little or as much as they want and at their own time. So it gives you this invitation to engage, to ponder, to ignore, like you have the choice. So in that sense, there's no pressure. And the other thing is that you don't have to necessarily have an opinion about the art. You can, and you probably do, but you don't have to, right? So you're not expected to do anything, to say anything. And that's, I think, very liberating.
It's interesting. I think we live in a world that's like completely out of sorts and out of order. And one thing I noticed about your work is that the sacred feminine really is a big part of your work, and it's always been. Why? Why is that? Why is that important?
It's part of it is just survival. Part of it is, women have such wisdom, and they have had this wisdom for, since the beginning of humanity. And we have to rely on that. I have to tap into that wisdom in order to deal with the world sometimes. The world that we live in right now has a lot of the issues that are created by, just testosterone fights where, either a country or a person or a corporation, they just want to be bigger and better than somebody else. And I think we need to rely on that feminine wisdom in terms of thinking long term, thinking protection of the environment, and thinking more globally. Because I think sometimes women have the skills to look at the big picture a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you're talking to two men here, right? But I completely agree. I feel that like this world has reached a point where the division of power needs to be more equitable for there to be more women, as leaders. I'm ready for it. I'm ready for the testosterone driven world to take a break, because I agree. Like I think that women have a different way of looking at the world for the most part. I mean, in generalities, I do think women tend to seek community more than men, and I think this is part of the, I don't want to bring it back to the Latinos for Trump type thing, but I do feel like there's a lot of lone wolves out there that are men who are just like, I can do it myself. There's like this like machista sort of like, I don't need anybody else to do what I need to do to get the things that I need. Whereas women are like more, I feel like they're more like seeking of camaraderie, seeking of community, looking for ways that the group can benefit rather than just one person. So I commend you for that art.
And sometimes it's not about women, having more, an idea of community or family or this kind of more feminine things or skills. I think in general, what the female in general in nature has is an ability to multitask, right? So that helps. So you're not focused on just one particular thing, but you're focused on a larger picture. And the other thing is that it doesn't necessarily mean men and women, but just a female energy that we all have and that we all can tap into and just, connect with. And I think that will be just helpful. But sometimes, I mean, these kinds of situations where people are, just put up one against another, and it's just this sense of danger and fear that works really well in terms of instilling that, just drive to survive by myself, for myself, my little circle, my little family. And we have to fight against that because it really works. And it's what the system right now is doing to all of us.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I appreciate that you bring up the fact. Sorry, Led, just to follow up because I want to make sure that this is really highlighted. Is that you're not necessarily talking about women versus men. I appreciate that it's more like the feminine part that lives in all of us, right? Which many of us need to relearn in order to, be open to expressing that aspect. We've been taught by our culture, by so many things, sometimes by our parents, to, you know, be men and be strong, and we're not really necessarily taught about how to handle our emotions and how to express our emotions, which are often considered a more of a feminine type of thing. So I appreciate that you bring this sort of out of this binary that I was kind of discussing, which was men and women, and we're talking about this more holistically as feminine, and that I, Octavio, you Led, we both have like parts of ourselves that are more, that are feminine that we need to, we should be, as men, all of us should be learning how to access, and that would help us.
Yeah. Maybe maybe we could say something more instead of feminine. Maybe see it as a holistic, right? So it's not feminine or masculine. It's more of a holistic, universal sense that will help us kind of figure it out.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of this has to do with relearning certain things. I think that, for most of us, right, we're kind of like the products of empire, right? We come from somewhere else, and there was a thought, a value system that was imposed, right? And it's about going back and finding our true values, right? And I think, we come from matrilineal societies at the end of the day, right? Most of us do, right? But so to me, you know, if this what we're living through feels like a culmination, right? This is what happens when you discover America. 500 years later, this is what you get, right? Like, I think this is what we're living through right now, and I'm happy that you provide so much joy, because I tend to be kind of a pessimist sometimes, especially about the time we're living in now. So as an artist, as a very sensitive soul that has like a finger on the pulse of humanity, and I really do feel that you do that. Why am I wrong? Why is this not a dictatorship? Right? Why is this not like, why, what's your thoughts on where we are right now as a country, as a planet?
Oof. I mean, you're not wrong, but there's much more than that, in my opinion, right? Eh, I mean, I think that we are living what we have been voting for. We are living what we have been purchasing and consuming for generations. We have been, we, especially in this country, values have been material, materialistic, right? So when something like this happens, we're lost because we should be sheltering in community, sheltering on each other, like, taking care of each other and doing all of that. But I think in general, we have lost a little bit of that and we are scrambling for it right now. But I have to say, I'm an optimist by nature and by necessity. Optimism to me is survival. There is just no other way to look at life because otherwise, why wake up in the morning? And as an artist, I do the same thing. Like, you're in front of a canvas and the canvas is blank and you're painting and you're thinking, this is the most brilliant painting in the history of the world. And you kind of have to convince yourself that's the case because otherwise, why finish it, right?
Right.
At the same time, you're smart. You know it's not going to be the right, most brilliant piece of art in the world. But you have to, I have to get into these dynamics of creativity and optimism and power, where I can tap into imagination and creativity in a way that serves me. And I think
I
I
love
go
that.
through life doing the same thing. Like, when people are complaining, when things are horrible, I think, okay, yes, they are horrible, but we're here, right? We're not them. We're just different. And love is a wave and a tsunami that can change the world. And I was listening the other day to somebody saying that we maybe should think of those guys like the right and the Trumps as the opposition rather than thinking of ourselves as the opposition. Because life is like a river, right? And a river flows and it flows one way. Whatever happens, it keeps flowing. And then right now, I feel like these people are trying to stop that flow of progress, of beauty, of humanity that we have been, fighting so hard for generations and generations. And they're trying to stop it. It's not that they're creating a new thing. I mean, they know the river is going to flow, so they're trying their hardest to stop it, to block it, and it's just not going to happen. We're the river, so
I love that.
I
I
love
love
that.
that.
I love that.
So
Yeah.
Andrea,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so Women in the Heights Shade is opening February 25th. I will be there. Octavio will be there. Uptown will be there. But I know you have so many other things happening. So can you give us an inkling of the many things you're doing around the world?
yes. So I'm spending 3 months and I'm going to Barcelona mostly to paint in the spring. And then I have an exhibition scheduled for France in the fall. Yeah, always something new happening and new projects going on. So, yeah, exciting. always.
Well, when we're talking about optimism, we were just like, what I wanted to say is, Led, you've been sort of, you have this particular way of looking at the world, which I appreciate a lot, because you're very realistic about things, and you always, what is it that you say? The sort of the to have to be able to look at things negatively, right, is important.
Yeah, I
But
always say the failure of negative imagination. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
that's
That's
it.
what I
The
thought.
failure of negative imagination. I totally appreciate that. But on the flip side of that, I find what you're saying, it made me think about all those people who are currently sheltering in community, who are currently, whether it be in Minneapolis or Chicago or Los Angeles or New York City, we are sheltering in community. We do have our communities, and it is helping us to feel safer. It is helping us to feel more empowered, even though it has sometimes the most negative effects, which is life ending, right? When we see some, like, people like Preddy who were assassinated, or Good who was assassinated. But like you say, that's the river that continues to flow, because behind those individuals, there's thousands, if not millions, of people that are continuing to stand up to fight for what's right. And even in my optimistic viewpoint, making a difference so that folks who, say, were enticed to the right are starting to see the error of their ways. Maybe not enough, maybe not everybody, but there are some. So I do also think that you're right, that the river flows and this has been generations, and that it can't be stopped. And I hope it won't be stopped. I also believe that this is like a cornered animal, when they're the most dangerous, but that's also when they're the most vulnerable. So of course they're going to be loudly barking. Of course they're going to be lashing out. But if we can remain strong, we can get over that. They are the opposition, and we are the right. In the right is what I mean. And so I see, Led, your point of view, and you've been on point for a lot of the things that you've predicted about what's happening and what's going to happen. But I do feel that beyond where we are right now, there is still the optimism of a better world. So thank you for inspiring me, Andrea. I really appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and again, I just want to say, like, I agree with you 100%, but I also feel that I feel that what's coming after is what, you know what I mean? I think that this thing that we living through right now is ending, and a new world's being born, and we're going through the labor pains. You know what I mean? I think it's going to be tough, and I agree with you. Ultimately, we will be better off. But Andrew, like, again, I really want to thank you again for joining us, for expounding, and just, like, like, getting. It's always amazing to see your work, and again, whenever it just resonates. And again, it's interesting because you take these deep topics, and you encapsulate them. I want to thank you for that. I want you to tell our audience how they could follow your work, your social media, your website, and any last words you may have, Andrea.
So, last words again, I believe that art can change the world and that beauty is revolutionary. My website is andreaarroyo.com. I'm on Instagram, Andrea Arroyo Art, and Blue Sky, and Facebook. So yeah, follow me and let's just join the river together. Just be the river.
Just be
Be
the
the
river.
river. I like that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you for speaking with us. This
You're very
window
welcome.
into your mind and your way of thinking is really, really, really empowering, and I appreciate it very much. So thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you. It was
Andrea.
a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of Uptown Voices. If you enjoy our work, please consider making a financial contribution to Uptown Voices. Contributions go a long way. You can contribute by scanning the QR code on the screen or visiting bit.ly/Uptown Voices 2026. If you can't make a financial contribution, please spread the word about our show to friends and family. And to stay up to date on the latest in Uptown, you can follow Uptown Collective on Instagram, Facebook, and X. If you're watching Uptown Voices on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and to give us a like. Until next time, this has been Uptown Voices.